Welcome back to Zero to Hero. Today's topic is a highly requested one. It builds off of our systematic approach to team building. We'll be considering how to team build with niche Pokemon. I'm assuming you've already watched the systematic approach to team building video, as this builds off of that. This is essentially just a few extra steps to that process. There's two main reasons to build with niche or weak Pokemon. But before we get into those, there is an important distinction between a Pokemon that is weak or bad and a Pokemon that has a niche. Weak Pokemon simply have bad stats, limited movesets, bad abilities, or poor typing. Often all four of these, or more than one of them at least, combined together make a Pokemon weak. An example of a weak Pokemon is something like Spidops or Ledian, with straight up bad stats, shallow movesets, poor typing, and nearly useless abilities. Both of these Pokemon are widely considered to be weak. Pokemon that are universally considered to be weak are actually quite uncommon, and many Pokemon that aren't meta actually fall into the niche category. The Google definition of niche is something that interests or appeals to a small, specialized section of the population. So applying that to Pokemon, something that's a niche is able to specialize in a small section of the metagame. Niche Pokemon are often still strong in at least one of those four categories, but they aren't found in the metagame for a variety of reasons. Having bad matchups, relying on gimmicks, and being overlooked are common reasons. But the most common reason is simply being outclassed by other Pokemon. Consider something like Blaziken or Iron Thorns. Both have multiple good or even great stats, pretty good offensive typing, amazing abilities, and a decent move pools. But they're just outclassed by other Pokemon that compete for the same role. Niche Pokemon are very much still able to fill specific roles or functions on a team. And today we'll go over the systematic approach to using niche Pokemon. Just before we get started, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video with someone you think might like it. In this case, we'll have a step 0 as well, which is something you need to consider before starting this task. Anytime you're using a niche Pokemon, the chances are pretty high that you'll have a better option that you're foregoing, and you should accept that you're at usually a slight disadvantage in most cases by not using that stronger Pokemon. And this is okay. If you're able to understand what your disadvantages are, you can play around them to mitigate them. So are there any benefits to using niche Pokemon? And what reasons would we use them over stronger Pokemon? Let's consider that second question first. What reasons do we have to use them over stronger Pokemon? The first and most common reason to use niche Pokemon is that you simply want to use your favorites, but they aren't very strong in the metagame. Another reason, and the most successful reason, is that you've identified a niche in the meta that can be filled by a specific Pokemon. This is often the case for when you see niche Pokemon actually have good success in tournaments. The iconic Worlds-winning Pachirisu was not chosen because it was one of Sajin's favorite Pokemon, but because it filled a specific niche and had a combination of tools that no other Pokemon had. In this case, Volt Absorb and Follow Me. Both of these reasons are valid for wanting to build around Pokemon, as winning, especially with your favorites, is a lot of fun. And winning with picks other players have overlooked can bring a feeling of accomplishment. So what benefits are there to using niche Pokemon? Of course, that sense of accomplishment we mentioned is one benefit, but you'll often have some level of surprise factor that can give a small edge in battles. Using something that people aren't expecting, or perhaps have never considered, can give you an advantage since you've been able to prep and practice against their team or similar matchups, but they likely have never been able to practice against yours. Another advantage is that it'll make you a stronger player in the long run. Making you play with a piece that is weaker than other options, you'll often need to play better to have the same success. And the last advantage is you may find a pick that's actually stronger than the current meta picks, making your team stronger overall. And one last thing before we get into our systematic approach, this is built for using one niche Pokemon on your team, as the rest of the team should just be built as normal, using generally strong Pokemon. Trying to fill your team with niche picks will really leave you struggling. And as you go through this process, and if you end up researching or looking into something else, always keep your eyes open for finding other Pokemon that perhaps isn't what you started with, but might still fill whatever role you end up looking to find. So let's look at our step-by-step process. There's also 7 questions, but they're a lot quicker than the whole systematic approach. 1. Identify what Pokemon you're planning on using. Is it a specific Pokemon you had in mind, or do you think you've found a niche in the meta that should be filled? 2. Review its 4 categories. Look at its stats, moveset, typing, and ability, and find out in which areas it excels in. 3. Decide its role or its function. Is it an offensive Pokemon, a defensive Pokemon, a pivot? Many niche Pokemon end up becoming supports due to not needing any good offensive stats for that. 4. Find its niche. Which of the 4 categories can it excel at? And is it able to outperform any meta threats at any one specific thing or role, and compare it to meta options that are similar to it? Also, consider what its matchup is into other meta Pokemon. 5. Build basic spreads. 6. Incorporate it into a team, and don't just build the team solely around it. Find partners for it, find an archetype it fits into, and step 6 you can kind of consider as the entirety of the systematic approach to team building, as you can start with your niche Pokemon and then build around it. And step 7, again, is the same from the team building video, is to playtest. Let's start with step 1. We'll go through 2 examples in this video, and each example will fulfill a different role on a team, just to give you an idea of how excelling at different sections of those 4 categories can change the approach you use to build the Pokemon. Step 1. Identify what Pokemon you're planning on using. We could use a favorite, or we could have identified a niche in the meta. Both reasons are valid, but for this example, we'll be using the second option. Today, we'll be looking at how my friend settled on using Electrode on one of his regional teams. After we played at Louisville, we were both looking for something fresh, and the topic of the fastest Pokemon in the format came up. Of course, we brought up Dragapult with a base speed of 142, but he wasn't the fastest. Electrode was faster, sitting at 150. Neither of us have ever seen an Electrode used at all in the whole lifespan of Scarlet and Violet, but surely something having this high a speed that can outspeed any common threat like Dragapult, Sneasel, or Talonflame would somehow be useful. So we set off for step 2 to research Electrode further. Step 2. Review the 4 categories and compare it to meta options. First, we'll take a look at its stats. Hence, we already knew it had an amazing speed stat of 150. Its other stats really aren't good at all. Defensive stats of 60, 70, 80, and offensive stats of 50 and 80, nothing exceptional. So knowing it has poor offensive and defensive stats, but a good speed stat, again, it'll likely end up being a support Pokemon. Let's look at its moveset. When analyzing any Pokemon's moveset, focus on its learn set moves and egg moves before focusing on any TMs. TMs have very wide distribution and are usually more generic moves. Many worthwhile niche options are often found in the level up or egg move sections. Things like Follow Me and Fake Out are not TMs and will always be found here. Next, note down any moves you think could be useful. Physical, special, status moves, it doesn't matter. This is just kind of the brainstorming phase. So from level up and egg learn sets, we noted down Eerie Impulse, Screech, Discharge, Light Screen, and Metal Sound. That's pretty shallow, so we'll look at some viable TMs as well. Thunder Wave, Volt Switch, Taunt, Helping Hand, Thunderbolt, Electric Terrain, Electro Web, Scary Face, Thunder, and Foul Play all stood out to us. Since we're using Cerebi, Hisuian Electrode's learn set happened to be here as well. And since we weren't dead set on using regular Electrode, and Hisuian has the same stats, let's note any moves that Hisuian Electrode might be able to make use of. We'll only list things that regular Electrode doesn't get here, or mention things that regular gets and Hisuian doesn't, since there's a lot of overlap. Notable learn set and egg moves that Hisuian Electrode gets are Bullet Seed, Grassy Terrain, Chloroblast, and Worry Seed. From TMs, we had Grassy Glide, Reflect, Leaf Storm, Energy Ball, and Solar Beam. The main moves Hisuian doesn't have access to are Eerie Impulse, Metal Sound, and Helping Hand. We could go a few ways with this, but let's keep this list in mind as we continue to look at its typing. Pure Electric. It's a decent typing, solid offensively and defensively with only one weakness, but as we mentioned, it likely won't be an offensive piece on the team. Hisuian is Grass and Electric, is worse defensively with 4 weaknesses, but it combos well with Electric offensively, allowing us to hit ground types that Electricity doesn't hit. Lastly, let's look at its abilities. Both forms share the same 3 abilities: Soundproof, Static, and Aftermath. Aftermath is quite bad, as it's only beneficial when you get KO'd, and only when you get KO'd by physical contact moves. Static and Soundproof both have potential. Static has been seen on things like Zapdos or Electabuzz in previous formats, and is a decent answer to things like Urshifu that hit multiple times and really don't want to be paralyzed. But overall, Static is just kind of a passive bonus effect you get once in a while. Soundproof gives immunity to sound-based moves. Looking at a list of sound moves, there's actually a decent amount that we'll be able to switch in for an immunity to. Notably, moves like Clanging Scales, Parting Shot, Snarl, and Hyper Voice were all pretty common in the metagame of Reg H. Pokemon like Incineroar, Archaludon, and Primarina are all very common, while Kommo-o was seen here and there. Soundproof is probably the best ability for our purposes. Particularly, Parting Shot was everywhere with Incineroar usage through the roof. Being able to switch in and block the Parting Shot can be a huge momentum swing. And a lot of people forget what Soundproof does and what moves are actually affected by Soundproof, so we'll definitely be able to knowledge gap some players with that. Let's move to step 3, deciding its role. Due to its poor offensive stats, poor defensive stats, middling at best typing, but wicked fast speed stat, comboed with its decent supportive move pool, Electrode is definitely best suited as a support Pokemon. In order for something to be a reasonable offensive threat, double-digit offensive stats just don't cut it, even with a powerful signature move like Chloroblast. Take Tinkaton for an example. Even with a move like Gigaton Hammer that has a base power of 160, its base 75 attack holds it back from being a serious offensive threat. Step 4. Find its niche. What categories can it excel in? Well, we identified very early that its niche will be moving before anything else, thanks to its huge speed stat. Its moveset also seems decent, so what niche can we find from its moveset? We could use either form in the rain, as it has access to a Stab Thunder. Hisuian would also appreciate having its fire weakness removed. Hisuian has access to Solar Beam, so we could even try it in the sun to have both of these moves work on one turn. But building around just one weather-dependent move, when neither of these moves even benefit from the power boost of rain or sun, is pretty suboptimal. And we already identified that an offensive build isn't the way to go. So let's consider our status moves. We have strong speed control with moves like Electro Web, Thunder Wave, and Scary Face. It can also shut down opposing supports by moving first with the fastest taunt in the format. Since we aren't Prankster boosted, things like Psychic Terrain, Armor Tail, and Dark types will not be immune to our taunt, or any of our support moves, like they would be against Prankster support Pokemon. Screech or Metal Sound could be paired with strong attackers, allowing us to weaken our target before they move and then finish them off with an ally. Thunderbolt, Foul Play, Discharge, Energy Ball, and Leaf Storm can all be solid offensive moves. Having a stab option is nice, as having 4 support moves can leave you in a rough spot sometimes. And Foul Play is great for not needing a good attacking stat yourself. We could go for some self-targeting strategy with something like Discharge or Bullet Seed to trigger something on our side as well. Can it outperform any meta threats? Well, with the fastest speed control in the format, it will definitely outperform anything that isn't Prankster boosted speed control. It's so fast, actually, it can outspeed some Scarf Pokemon. Its most similar comparison for a meta Pokemon would be Whimsicott. If we're looking at Hisuian Electrode, they're both fast grass types that provide strong speed control, as well as other general support options. Whimsicott is slower, but it has stronger speed control thanks to Prankster and Tailwind. It also has access to things Electrode doesn't, like Encore, Charm, Switcheroo, or even Memento. While some moves it shares, like Taunt, Helping Hand, Worry Seed, they also both have a decent stab move with something like Moonblast versus Thunderbolt. Beat Up from Whimsicott is comparable to Bullet Seed, and Fake Tears is comparable to Metal Sound. So if we're only using Electrode for the things Whimsicott can also do, we might as well use Whimsicott. But there are benefits to using things like a non-Prankster boosted Taunt, as mentioned, or Electro Web over Tailwind, so let's focus on these types of things. Consider its matchup into other meta Pokemon. In this case, Electrode does have a pretty decent matchup into the relatively common Rain archetype. Electro Web will hit both opponents, and bring Pelipper down to its Focus Sash since it's 4 times super effective, as well as lowering Pelipper's speed, allowing an ally to take it out if normally it would have been slower than Pelipper. It also has a good matchup into things like both Ursalunas, with grass attacks being able to hit both super effectively, as well as something like Basculegion. Not to mention its grass typing gives it an immunity to both Rage Powder and Spore from the ever-prevalent Amoonguss. It also has some pretty decent resistances to things like Steel and Grass from other common meta Pokemon in Goldengo and Rillaboom. Step 5. Build some basic spreads. With all these options, let's build a disruptive set, a self-targeting set, and a general support set. Electro Web, Taunt, Screech, and Volt Switch can be an option. This gives speed control, anti-trick room options, and damage enhancement. Some moves can be substituted here, so let's make a suggested spread and we'll try a few options off of that. Supports are often vulnerable to Fake Out, so Covert Cloak could be a good option for them. As for a Terra type, we really don't have anything crazy. We could go Terra Grass to ignore any Rage Powders, but Hisuian Electrode is already Grass. Perhaps we could go Terra Ghost if we want to avoid Fake Outs, and a Focus Sash will allow our frail Pokemon to live a hit. We can pair it with anything fast and strong. You could try something like Dragapult or Garchomp to benefit from the Screech defense drop. Max speed and max attack is the way to go here since we want to move first, and we don't really need bulk since we have a Focus Sash. We could just speed creep Dragapult to save EVs for something else, But again, with the Focus Sash, we don't need to min-max EVs to put it in our bulk. So let's make a disruptive set using regular Electrode, something like this, and we'll move on to making a Hisuian Electrode set. This set we can pair with something like our Chalodon to get a fast self-bullet seed to trigger stamina boosts. Terra Ghost again for a fake out immunity, but perhaps we'll try loaded dice on this set to ensure bullet seed hits 4 or 5 times. Since we aren't using a Focus Sash here, let's speed creep Dragapult and invest more heavily in defenses. Lastly, a general support set. This is the set we actually first used when we were testing Electrode. We went for Hisuian with the moves Electro Web, Screech, Leaf Storm, and Volt Switch. Terra Ghost, along with the Wide Lens, makes Electro Web 100% accurate, and the other inaccurate moves in Screech and Leaf Storm are bumped up to 93 and 99% accuracy, which is pretty good. Again, since we aren't using a Focus Sash, we invested just enough speed to outspeed Dragapult and put the rest into bulk. Step 6. Incorporate into a team. When building with a niche Pokemon, the whole team should not revolve around the one Pokemon. For better success, they should be integrated into a team, or function well on one or more modes of the team. As having a whole team built around one niche Pokemon, which is likely the weakest piece of the team, is just asking to get steamrolled when the game plan doesn't work out. So how do we integrate Electrode into a team? Well, that's where the systematic approach to team building comes in. You can use your niche Pokemon in your basic spreads as an idea for step 2 of the systematic approach, and follow through the rest of that video to build out the rest of your team. Or if you have another idea for step 2 of that approach, you can always keep this Pokemon in the back of your mind as you go through the systematic approach, and as you continue to build teams in the future. And if an opportunity for it to fit in ever comes up, you can slot it in. Since we didn't have access to a computer and we were just testing on our phones, our first draft of a team was something like this. In terms of finding partners, we paired it with multiple strong physical attackers that can benefit from the fast speed control and the fast screeches. Leaf Storm can also deal a chunk with its high base power, and Volt Switch for positioning. We had also both faced Vivilions at the tournament, so it was fresh on our mind, and this gave us another speed control option if something were to wall out Electrode. As for finding an archetype, with the insane speed and pairing it with heavy hitters, the team leaned toward hyper offense. Lastly, step 7 is playtest and adjust. Pretty much the same as the last step for our team building video. You need to playtest things and change what doesn't work. After much playtesting, we found the hyper offense team was performing alright, but it wasn't really anything special. And after about a month of building for the next regional, we tried the other set of Electrode, which included Bullet Seed and Loaded Dice. Since we were both quite comfortable with the Rain archetype, we figured we could pair it with our Chalodon for a self-targeting Bullet Seed that would bring our Chalodon up to +4 or +5 defense, which combos very well with Body Press. My buddy also thought about Annihilate. Scarf Annihilate was quite common to outspeed Dragapult, but Electrode outspeeds Dragapult naturally, so he EV'd Annihilate to outspeed Dragapult with the Choice Scarf, and EV'd Electrode to just barely outspeed the Annihilate. This allowed him to Bullet Seed Annihilate, then allow Annihilate to attack with a max base power Rage Fist right away on turn 1. Both Pokemon outspeed anything in the meta, provided they didn't have immediate speed control. Even if they did have immediate speed control, these two Pokemon are so fast that they would still sometimes outspeed opponents with Tailwind. The rest of the team was quite standard. He ended up adding Worry Seed over Grass Attack, and changed Volt Switch to Thunderbolt for just higher damage, and after playtesting realized he didn't really need to position Electrode in and out that much. Worry Seed is a move that replaces the target's ability with Insomnia. This move is almost never used, as spending a turn and a move slot to change a target's ability to something that isn't really that negative is a big ask, but he was able to find 2 great uses for it. Of course, targeting opponents who really want their ability, particularly opposing our Chalodons with a self-stamina setup, like Whimsicott with Beat Up. If Whimsicott goes for Beat Up on our Chalodon, Electrode can move first, so Electrode can use Worry Seed on the opposing our Chalodon, removing its stamina, preventing them from increasing their defense, allowing him to win the mirror after setting up his own Chalodon the following turn. It was also great at weakening other common Pokemon that relied on their ability, like Ursaluna, opposing Bastilegions, Kingambit, and more. But the real winner on a good use for this move was using it on his own Pokemon, again, particularly our Chalodon, but after he gets it set up. This makes it immune to sleep, and thus immune to Spore from Amoonguss. Gaining Insomnia while asleep also wakes the Pokemon up, so having the option to Worry Seed any ally for a Spore immunity was pretty good. This is Electrode's niche. It can outspeed the fastest Pokemon in the format, set up its ally in Annihilate or Archaludon with Bullet Seed, then provide speed support with Electroweb, and allowed the team to have a stronger Amoonguss matchup, as well as disrupting opponents while catching them off guard with this unique move and speed tiers that nobody had studied. So after we're able to find a niche, build a team that incorporated the niche into the team and didn't just focus on that, he was able to have some pretty good success with this Electrode team. He did end up going 5-3 at the tournament, just barely not making day 2, but he will gladly admit that his gameplay in a couple of the early rounds was definitely lacking, rather than the team itself lacking, and if he was able to just make a few better decisions early on, I'm pretty confident he would have made day 2 with the team. And he was only 1 win away from qualifying for day 2, so even getting that far with an Electrode is pretty good. Let's go through the steps again with our second example. Electrode showcased how its moveset and stats were what enabled it to find some success, so we'll use a Pokemon that showcases how a strong ability and typing can excel. Step 1. Our next pick is Hisuian Zoroark. I had no particular meta reason for using it, but I think it's a super cool Pokemon, and it has some decent options, so I wanted to give it a try. Step 2. Review its 4 categories. Hisuian Zoroark's stats are actually pretty decent, all things considered. The standouts are a very viable 125 special attack, as well as a solid base 110 speed. Its defenses, however, are incredibly lacking. With 55, 60, 60, this is one of the frailest fully evolved Pokemon. Moveset. After using the same method of looking through its learn set and TMs for moves, here are the standouts. Normally I would also consider regular Zoroark, but in this case, for it being a favorite and we really want to use Hisuian, rather than looking for any meta niche, we'll just stick with Hisuian. From its learn set and egg moves, we have U-Turn, Shadow Sneak, Taunt, Knockoff, Shadow Ball, Nasty Plot, Bitter Malice, Foul Play, Comeuppance, and Memento. From TMs, we have Fake Tears, Snarl, Icy Wind, Trick, Will-O-Wisp, Grass Knot, Hyper Voice, Psychic, Dark Pulse, Flamethrower, Calm Mind, Helping Hand, Sludge Bomb, Focus Blast, Hyper Beam, and Burning Jealousy. Well, this is a very diverse moveset, partially thanks to its normal typing, as normal types often get a lot of coverage, and partially due to building off of regular Zoroark's theme of being a trickster, adding many disruptive moves. Its typing is the unique normal Ghost. Offensively, it's alright, as very few types resist Ghost, but normal isn't really great offensively. Defensively, however, it's incredible, with only 1 weakness, 2 resistances, and most importantly, 3 immunities. Very few Pokemon have this many immunities. Not to mention the defensive synergy between these types specifically. Normal is only weak to fighting, and Ghost is weak to Ghost. These typings fully cancel out each other's weaknesses by turning them into immunities, and an immunity to Fake Out is pretty good. It only has 1 ability in Illusion. This is a unique ability that only the Zoroark lines have. The ability makes a Pokemon appear to the opponent as if it were the last Pokemon selected in Team Preview. This disguise is broken when damaged by an attack, but will reappear if it switches out and back in. This does not change anything about Zoroark's stats, moves, or typing, only the in-game appearance. This is such a unique ability. Since your opponent has no way to know which Pokemon you selected last in Team Preview, they will never know on turn 1 what Zoroark is illusioned as, and immediately puts them on the back foot when trying to predict what you'll do. Many people don't know exactly how it works, and even when they do, they can still be thrown off guard by it, since actually seeing a Pokemon in-game can cause even the best players to forget about the possibility of this ability. 3. Decide its role or function. This Pokemon's awful defensive stats leave it with 2 options, a special attacking offensive threat, or a speedy support. What does its moveset lend it to? Well, it has a huge variety on both of these fronts, with strong stab attacks like Shadow Ball, Hyper Voice, and Hyper Beam, wide coverage options like Flamethrower, Psychic, Grass Knot, Sludge Bomb, and Dark Pulse. Access to Nasty Plot could even lend to it being a setup sweeper. It also has a very strong supportive lineup, with things like Snarl, Icy Wind, Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, Knockoff, Fake Tears, and Helping Hand. We really could go either way with this Pokemon. When we get to building our set step, we'll try an option for both support and offense. Step 4. Find its niche. Which of the 4 categories does it excel at? Well, it really has something going for it in all of the categories, with solid offensive stats, a wide move pool, and a crazy typing and ability combo. This is a very unique Pokemon, and it doesn't really have anything in the meta that we can compare it to. This type synergy, however, is the Pokemon's true niche. Its typing with its ability can allow you to bait in certain attacks from your opponents. In this case, we want our opponent to attack us with things that we're immune to, so fighting, ghost, and normal moves. If we can disguise Zoroark as a Pokemon that is weak to these types, we can throw our opponent for a loop when they're expecting to deal super effective damage and they end up doing nothing. That's a niche. Pairing it with something that really dislikes those types of attacks, and using the illusion ability to trick our opponent into attacking it with those attacks. The main thing that will allow this Pokemon to succeed over other meta Pokemon really is smart play and good team building, rather than directly comparing it to any meta Pokemon, since again there's really no comparison for how unique this is. We can still look at its meta matchups though. Having the normal ghost offensive coverage, nothing in the metagame resists both stabs, as anything that resists normal is usually neutral or weak to ghost, and anything that is immune or resists ghost is at least neutral to normal, so offensively it should do pretty well. 5. Build basic spreads. Let's build a couple offensive spreads and a supportive spread. We'll just use max special attack and max speed EVs for all of these sets since it's so frail. Trying to invest in any defenses here really isn't getting us very far. We will, however, put our last 4 EVs in special defense to slightly optimize against the Porygon 2 matchup. Offensively, we can really lay into the things that it's good at, so we could equip a choice specs to enhance that good special attack, and just focus on our stab attacks with an offensive Terra. We could try something like Hyper Voice, Shadow Ball, Hyper Beam, and Terra Blast. With a choice specs, this will allow us to hit very hard with any move. We could go Terra Normal to lay in with Hyper Voices or nuke something with a Hyper Beam. Terra Stellar is also a good option here, as we want to keep all the immunities from both of our types, and this would still give us a boost to our normal attacks once, and it would boost our Shadow Ball if we were to use it as well. Hyper Beam just gives us a straight up delete button against many things, and Terra Blast can give us a single target stab move if needed. We could also really choose any Terra type for a coverage move with Terra Blast should we find ourselves lacking some type of coverage on our team. For an alternate offensive set, we could try something like Hyper Voice, Shadow Ball, Nasty Plot, and Protect. With a Focus Sash, again Terra Normal or Terra Ghost will be sufficient, since there aren't really any defensive Terras, and again terrestrializing defensively with something this frail and already holding a Focus Sash isn't very useful. So here we have a setup set option. If we find ourselves wanting Focus Sash on something else, we could go a defensive Terra type like Fighting or Fairy that will allow us to resist Dark, and then bring a Life Orb for an alternative item. Lastly, for a supportive set, we could try something like Will-O-Wisp, Snarl, Icy Wind, and then the last slot could be something like Protect, Taunt, Trick, Hyper Voice, or Shadow Ball. This can really slow opponents down with Icy Wind and reduce their damage with Will-O-Wisp and Snarl. These other moves can be good to disrupt, and we can still bring a stab option if we need for damage. Focus Sash, again, would be pretty good on this set since it's just so frail. For a defensive Terra type that works good on a support Pokemon, since we're already Ghost, we don't need that, so we could go something like Dark or Grass, which would give us immunity to Prankster boosted moves or Powder moves. 6. Incorporate it into a team. Again, we can use this Pokemon or these sets as our initial idea for step 2 in the systematic approach to team building, and continue from there. But for now, we'll consider our last 2 options. As for partners, we mentioned we want to use things that are weak to Fighting, Ghost, or Normal that would synergize well with the illusion mechanic. Other normal types and steel types like Ursaluna or Archaludon could work great to bait in fighting moves, while other ghost types would be great like Annihilate or Goldengo, since they share no or only one weakness in Dark. And again, both bait in ghost moves, which we're immune to. Anything that is likely to get hit by a fake out could also be good to set our illusion as. As for archetypes, I think it would work great on Hyper Offense with the Nuke and Hyper Beam, or even Hyper Voice being very strong spread damage. It could also find a place on balanced teams, being able to disrupt your opponent with illusion early in a match, and it can switch in and out, perhaps even with U-turn, to reset the illusion. Even on a Trick Room team, it could find a home. You could pair it with something to set Trick Room early, while it does huge damage, weakening your opponent out the gate. And you could have it set its illusion as something very threatening on your Trick Room mode that your opponents want to target. Once your opponents target it, and you set Trick Room with your ally, then you're able to send in your actual Trick Room sweeper and finish the game from there. Having Zoroark Illusion as something that has a very different speed tier than itself will also throw opponents way off guard when they expect it to move at a certain point in the turn, but it moves way before or way after than they would have expected it to. Being able to illusion it as something that shares a move with it, for example here Ursaluna Blood Moon, as they both share Hyper Voice, and you're able to click Hyper Voice Illusion as Ursaluna Bloodmoon. And with no ability that would give it away to your opponent that this is actually Zoroark, most people's first thought will be, why is this Ursaluna so fast? And it might even take 10 or 15 seconds for your opponent to put it together that this is actually Zoroark. But that's a whole 10 or 15 seconds that you've taken away from them spending their turn to try and figure out their move. Or if they're not able to put it together, then you're at a huge advantage as they're playing as if they're facing a Blood Moon, which they're not. And that's all the steps for how to team build with niche Pokemon. Hopefully you're able to use these examples to be able to analyze and find some success with your favorite Pokemon, or be able to use these skills to find niches in the meta that just might have a Pokemon that would fill it that no one else has considered. Thanks for watching.